Mm. Hello guys, thank you so much for your reaction to my last video. My name is Mo on Mo's Lifestyle. Welcome to my show. And this week I think we're going to focus on more serious things. I had said that we're going to be showing you a lot of travel videos. We did that in December, yeah? We did travel videos in December and fun videos because it was kind of a holiday month. Right now I was thinking to myself, I really haven't been fair to myself in terms of addressing issues at the same time as having fun, because it's also part of like working hard, playing hard, right? Yeah. So for those of you who don't know who the heck this is me. My name is Mo. I'm in the country of Kenya currently. I live between the UK and Kenya. My extended family is in Kenya. My nuclear family is in the UK. And I tell you, there's nothing harder than living between two worlds. Yeah. So today I thought I'd like to talk to you guys about the issue. I want to give you my reaction to what's going on in Minnesota. Why is it important to me? Because I lived in Minnesota for about 8 years, not consecutively, divided up, like the first 4 years for my undergraduate degree from 1987, I believe, to 91. And then after that, I came back to Kenya to practice what I was studying for, which was international development. I wanted to develop Kenya. That's the reason why I went to America in the first place. Yeah. And then when I was in Kenya, then I kind of sharpened my focus for what I would like to do for any additional education. And I decided to go back and actually study program evaluation at the same University of Minnesota, where I was studied for my undergraduate as well. I came back, not alone, but I came back with a little baby boy. Okay. And this is him right here. I'll show you a little picture of him when he was a baby. That's him. I came back with him. Yeah, that's the guy I came back with. Yeah, so I came back to be a mom, to raise this little baby that I had, excuse me, to raise this little baby that I had as an undergraduate alone. And my parents just would not hear of the fact that I'll be out there with their grandkid alone. So I came back, and after staying with him until he was about 1.5 years, I went back by myself to go and do my postgraduate degree in evaluation and monitoring and evaluation. Why did I have to do that? Because somebody had to be checking on the investments of Americans and foreigners in African projects. Okay. So that role was important. Why? Because that role is about ensuring and enhancing accountability and transparency for the use of resources, especially by development partners, they call them, or by donor organizations, normally international donor organizations. So I was playing a part in terms of assessing the utility of the funds towards the goals and objectives of projects, and to ensure that there was benefit to the communities. And that's what I studied in university. It was kind of a new field then. It's not so new anymore. There are many people who are in this field now. But I made a living from that, and I raised my son that way. Now, what do I want to talk about today? Today, I want to talk about the situation concerning the Somalis in Minnesota, in the state that gave me my education, my first experience to life in America. Minnesota is very close and very dear to my heart because I lived with a family. When I first went to Minnesota, I stayed with a host family. My host dad was one of the university professors in geography, I believe, in East African geography at the University of Minnesota. And his dear wife, Pat, his name was Phil, and his dear wife, Pat, was a beautiful musician. Was a music composer. She spent most of her life in the attic composing music. And I was between the attic and the ground floor doing my thing, as a young person, because my host father was a university professor and his children had left the nest. Why are these details important? Because I want to show you how close I got to Minnesotans, white Minnesota family. So this is a little history about myself and how did I get to meet Phil and Pat? Phil himself was a geography professor, but he had also met my dad, who was working here at an agricultural research station. My father was an agricultural physicist. very smart, intelligent, and he taught Phil mathematics here in Kenya. There was a time that Phil came for his research paper, and my dad helped him with mathematics, because my dad was leading the research station. And that is how they met, and they decided. And Phil was so happy and grateful. They said, when your daughter is ready to go to university, bring her over. We'll support her. We'll give her housing, and we'll give her accommodation and food, and you can just pay her school fees. And that's exactly what happened. I was sent over to the US after having served actually in Kenya at what they used to call NYS, National Youth Service. In those days, it felt like a punishment to go to the National Youth Service. After you pass your exams, you have to go to the National Youth Service, serve a few, go and be trained. Paramilitary training. It's not really military training, it's paramilitary training, where you're taught to be tough and hard. And that is how actually it was so important for me to have that, because I lived a very sheltered life before that. But now I feel like I can face a lot of things because of my training at the NYS. The only thing they didn't teach us what to do is how to shoot, how to pew pew. We don't have to know how to do that. But how to be disciplined, how to run, how to endure hardship, we went through that. But I didn't complete it because somewhere in the middle, I was pulled out to go to America. And this is how I ended up in Phil and Pat's house in Minnesota. Beautiful Victorian home, lovely, lovely couple, wonderful neighbors. I used to babysit for a Jewish neighbor and make a little bit of money on the side. And I also worked at the University Hospital. I worked at the University of Minnesota Hospital. So Minnesota became like my home. That was for my undergrad. And then I had my son, went back and then came back, and I was living on my own, working. I worked at the university for a while. At the same time, I was also doing business. Yeah. So I've always had a business sense, business mind, and I was doing business and going to fairs and things like that. So then after I finished my graduate degree with my son at the age of 7 years old, we came back to Kenya together. And so from that time, I've always been very grateful to Minnesota specifically, because we used to call Minnesota nice, the land of mosquitoes, but lovely, wonderful human beings. In fact, Minnesota became like a safe haven for many people, especially of color, because historically the northern states were always the places to go for refuge. That is where, you hear about historically, where you hear about when people were enslaved, the people in the north were more liberal, and they were the first to provide shelter and refuge for the freed slaves. Yeah. So the attitude of Minnesotans was to be nice, and they've always been nice, by the way. Yeah. So I think this is the reason why I believe that the Somali community found refuge in Minnesota. Okay, so what happened with the Somalis is that Somalia borders Kenya on one side. Okay, we have Somalia on one side in the north. They call it the Horn, the Horn of Africa in the north. On the northeast, that is where Somalia borders with us. And then we are also bordered with Uganda in the west. We also have a border with Tanzania in the south, yeah? And a little bit with Rwanda somewhere in there, yeah. So this is Kenya here on the side, facing on the Indian Ocean. And I'll show you a map in here to see where Somalia is. So Somalis, because in the 1840s, when they were drawing the map of Africa, these people were just doing it haphazardly without considering communities. So we have a few Somalis in Kenya, people of Somali origin living in Kenya. Okay, in what they called Kenya now. So we have Somalis in Somalia and we have Somalis in Kenya. The same thing, we have Tanzanians in Kenya. We have some Tanzanians in Tanzania, especially the Maasai. Uganda, not so much because of the Lake Victoria. At least that was a good demarcation. But the fact is that Somalis are our brothers and sisters. We live together with them. As you know, Kenya has featured a lot in a lot of YouTube channels because we are very cosmopolitan society. We have the Asian community here who were brought here as what they called quote unquote coolies to build the railways from Tanzania, call it Tanganyika in those days, all the way to Uganda. They were brought from India because of their skill in building railways, and they remained and they stayed. So we also have Asian Kenyans here, and they are, the products of their grandparents and great-grandparents, and they're Kenyan to every degree. In fact, they speak perfect Swahili, many of them. We also have Somali Kenyans, like I said. We have Ugandans who came here during the war and remained as refugees, and they remained, and some of them went back. In Somalia, with the Somalis, we also have Somalis in Somalia, and we have Somali Kenyans. Now, the situation with Somalia, though, is a little bit more complex because the Somalis had to leave their country at one time because they had a very terrible dictator called Siad Barre. He ruled for about 30 years, yeah, from 1969 to about 1991. And that's my research. I've done a little bit of research on this. Of course, I've known about it because of my field of work. I've worked with organizations such as UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, on Dadaab camp in Somalia, where a lot of Somalis who fled Somalia on foot came to Kenya to seek refuge and were placed in that camp in Dadaab. And many of them were there. That camp, hosted millions of refugees, lots and lots of refugees, Dadaab and Kakuma camps. And they were there sleeping in tents, very terrible, harsh conditions in arid areas for many, many years. So Siad Barre, that guy, actually came into power because of a military coup. Initially, he was good. You know the way these military people come in. They come in very well, and he promoted peace and national unity. But before you know it, he was even bombing Hargeisa, which is now Somaliland, and also became very authoritarian. So eventually, there was, there was political dissent, and then many communities were just like annihilated in Somalia. It was terrible. It was terrible. Yeah. So what happened is that towards the end of his time in the late 80s, Siad Barre and his group, they were very violent towards the Somalis in their country. Yeah. Can you believe a country that doesn't have a functioning army? It doesn't have a police. It doesn't have the police. They don't have a judiciary. There's no safety net. There's nowhere for anyone to go. So that becomes a failed state. And that is when Somalia became a failed state. And many Somalis fled. They ran away. You can imagine a lot of women and children. So what happened is that they had now decided warlords. There was interclan fighting. There was famine, unfortunately, and very extremist violence against the Somalis. So children had to escape. A lot of parents ran away. A lot of schools closed. Hospitals were not functioning in Somalia, and then there was a lot of food insecurity. Actually, there was famine. So many people ran away. They were running away from danger in Somalia. And that's acceptable. That's understood because even right now, you can see that many people are fleeing many countries right now, including those in the West. When they feel insecure, many people flee. And that's exactly what happened to the Somalis. They ran away. And so most of the Somalis initially did not actually flee to Western countries. They fled to Kenya, countries such as Kenya, neighboring Kenya. And they fled on foot, like I said. And many of them were there from the 90s. So they spent many, many years and even decades in these camps, which were eventually closed, by the way, these refugee camps. So they were raising children in these camps in areas that are insecure, and they had their movement was restricted, their diets were restricted, they were relying on food aid. They didn't really have much right to work, and also they had very little protection, except from the United Nations. So Kenya became like a host or a third country for the Somalis back in the day. They could not provide citizenship, but they could provide a place for them to stay, like a containment area, like an area where they could just be, protected in a way. This is kind of similar to what's happening, with Ghana. You heard about that lady who was from Sierra Leone and was actually caught by ICE and deported to a third country called Ghana. Ghana is on the west coast of Africa, and it is also a third country that provides refuge to West Africans. But it is not permanent refuge, but it's temporary refuge. So Ghana also provides temporary refugee status or temporary protection status to other countries in West Africa where people cannot go back. So, for example, countries like Sierra Leone, where people have experienced extreme violence, including rape of women and things like that, extreme violence and extrajudicial unalivement and things like that. So Ghana has become that third country. But unfortunately, what happens is that a lot of people say, why don't the Somalis just go back to Somalia without even understanding the situation in Somalia? So one of the reasons why a lot of Somalis cannot go back to Somalia is because they just don't have the history of living there. Many people have for decades lived in a third country, such as Kenya or the US. how did how did Somalis come to the US in the first place? Yeah. Somalis did not enter the US through illegal channels. Somalis were brought, and I was a witness because I actually used to visit the embassy sometimes to go and get my visa to go to the US and to come back. I would see Somalis, being processed, their papers being processed by the American embassy in Kenya. So their papers were processed by the U.S. government. They were also processed by the refugee agencies such as UNHCR, ILO, no, like UNHCR and IOM, International Office for Migration. They did a lot of security and background checks on them. So these families, I was actually in Minnesota when these people arrived, because they started arriving around 1991, and I was there from 93 to 97. I was there. So Somalis were arriving in areas such as Rochester, which was a rich neighborhood in the U.S., where there's for example, there's Mayo Clinics in Rochester. So in affluent neighborhoods such as Rochester, also in St. Paul and Minneapolis, there were lots and lots of Somalis who were processed and brought into Minnesota. Why? Because Minnesota was sort of like a refuge state. Yeah. Just the same way, like, for example, Wales is a country of refuge in the United Kingdom. It considers itself a refuge country, Wales. So they went to St. Paul, they went to Rochester, they went to St. Cloud. Why? Because there were jobs and there were lots of people, looking for people to work. They were looking for workers. So lots of businesses needed these people to come in and work for them. Low-level, low-skill jobs, they were there. And again, also, Minnesota was willing to resettle these people. There was also housing available, and they were absorbed into housing. So basically, the government policy, they did not come in by accident. They did not come in they were not invading Minnesota. They came in not by accident, not by chaos, by strategy. Yeah, that was actually strategic, because Minnesota needed them, and Minnesota was ready to host them. So now, at the moment, we have like about 100,000, they say about 80 to 100,000 Somalis living in Minnesota. It's been a long time since I've been in Minnesota. I tried to go last year around April, but I was denied entry to the US, which was sad. But the total population of Minnesota is about 5.7 million. So if you calculate between 80 to 100,000 out of 5.7 or 6 million, we're talking about 2% of the population being Somali origin. A very tiny proportion of the population, and that is not significant. It's very, very small. Significant means anything from 10%, but these guys are only 2%. They're not even half the significance. They're almost insignificant. Now, what have Somalis done since they came? I remember when the young Somalis came to Minnesota, and I was really impressed because a lot of young people were actually riding the carts in the airport. I still remember young Somalis riding carts in the airport and taking the elderly everywhere. These guys started shops. They started all kinds of businesses. Some of them got employed, but very few of them because of language barriers. But you see, Somalians operate as clans, and even in Kenya, they come together to help each other. Yeah. And so just like that in Minnesota, they did the same. So many of them have gotten into politics. They have also become doctors and engineers and teachers and entrepreneurs. They've raised American children, they've contributed, and also their families have joined them. Okay. So Somalis have done really, really well compared to other refugee groups.
There are some things which are disturbing me, and I'm asking questions. Why Somalis are thriving in the US, and while we Kenyans, we are not? Just give me approximately 3 minutes. It will be bold, truthful, and solution-driven. Let me speak to all Black Africans, especially Kenyans in diaspora, and to every Gen Z listening. We need to talk. Why are Somalis who only arrived in the US recently thriving, building, and transforming the whole neighborhood, while Kenyans have been in the US for decades and are still struggling to make an impact? Why? Here is the shocking truth. It is not about the visa, it is about the vision. Somalis didn't come to play in the US. They came, one, with unity, purpose, a generational mindset, and deep economic strategy built around community power. Firstly, Somalis invest in each other. Kenyans often compete. That is our mistake. When a Somali lands in the US, he is welcomed by a community, given housing by a relative or fellow Muslim, given startup capital, and a pathway to business. Kenyans, you land, you are told you are on your own now. Some even avoid you so you don't disturb them. Jealousy, tribalism, and isolation kills momentum. Friends, tribalism has killed us as Kenyans. That's why, friend, we don't grow. And I repeat again, tribalism is a problem and our undoing in our nation, Kenya. Second, Somalis start businesses, Kenyans chase status. Somalis open gas stations, mini marts, halal restaurants, logistic business. They start small, live humble, and scale over time. What about our friends Kenyans? They work 2 jobs, buy a car, and send selfies. Compete on who has a better apartment, not who is building a future. Proverb 21:5 said that the plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. Third, Somalis think long term. Kenya thinks for today and now only. That is our undoing. Somalis are teaching their children business by the age 12. They own blocks in Minnesota, entire streets in Columbus. They buy homes, not just clothes. But what about our friends Kenyans? Still debating about Gucci and God. Still hiding their struggles behind filters. Still waiting to make it before helping someone. Wake up, Africans Gen Z. Being in America doesn't mean you will succeed. It is not location, it is a mindset. Somalis are teaching their people to own, build, and multiply. We are teaching ours to pause, brag, and send money home without building anything where they are. What must change, friend? 1, build community with your fellow believers, not competition. Start small business, even if it is a small, online or from home. Think generational, not emotional. Invest, don't impress. Find 2 or 3 trustworthy friends. Build something together. This is Pastor Sebu T. I won't be silent. While others build, we stagnate. It is time to rise.
Especially considering the fact that they were displaced for so many years and the fact that they had such a harsh upbringing. Same thing in Kenya. You see Somalis have done really, really well in Kenya as well. And this is not through fraud. This is through their own sheer effort, bringing themselves up by their own bootstraps, okay? So this community has worked hard. They are a Muslim community. That's one thing you should know. They are not Christians. They are Muslims, but they are not violent Muslims. These are just people who subscribe to a different religion. So basically, what does the law say, though? The law says that refugees are entitled to protection, guys. They are entitled to protection. That is why they had temporary protection status all the way back from then. So they received temporary protection status because of the fact that they came from an unsafe background, okay? So they're allowed now to live legally, to work, and to keep families, and to work together. But now you see the government of the US under Trump is revoking that status, that temporary protection status, which has been in effect from 1991, guys, from 1991. Okay, so now they're asking them to leave by, I think it was March 7th. And where exactly are they supposed to go? Think about these Somalis who have never lived in their own country. Where are they supposed to go? They're going to end up coming here to Kenya. Is that it? And how is that fair to Kenyans? How is that fair to Somalis? How is that fair to anyone? Yeah? Considering the fact that they have actually used their energy and their financial capacity to build up America, they are entitled to remain in America. That's my view, anyway. Yeah, that's my view. So this is what happened now. Now, apparently there's some Somalis, terrible Somalis out there. There's some terrible people who happen to be Somalis who decided to defraud the government of the US. Now, that was bad because, you see, fraud is not something that I support or anybody would support, right? But we know that of that 2% of the population, I believe not even 1% is even committing that fraud. So the thing is that under normal circumstances, crimes such as fraud are prosecuted at the individual level, but with the Somalis, it's being prosecuted at the community level. Yeah? The whole community The whole community is being profiled because a few people in the community have decided to commit fraud and to defraud the government of, I think it was about $2 billion. That means that at that point now, the entire community has to be profiled. It's very wrong, guys, because you can see the enforcement by ICE, you can see heavy immigration enforcements, you can see the fear that is spilling into their lives, you can see that what's happening, the intimidation of not just them, but also the Black community and all those who support them, including non-Blacks, the intimidation by ICE and people like that. So we can see that they're raiding homes. The neighborhoods right now are unsafe. A friend of mine who lives in Minnesota told me that she even lost her internet connection because there were all these helicopters all over, disrupting the signals. But this is what she told me, because of course I still have friends in Minnesota and they come back to me. Okay. And they told me that families, they're so traumatized. People can't even go to work. My friend cannot even go to work, by the way, sometimes because they're told, don't use this route, use that route instead. So she told me that she's not able to travel. She's not able to go home. She's not able to go to work sometimes. And this is a professional working in the medical field. And she cannot go to work just because of these ICE raids in Minnesota. So, I'm combining my actual research with real lived experience, guys, because it's important to understand that these are double standards. These are double standards. Why are the Somalis being punished as a community instead of the individuals being punished? Are they the only ones who have defrauded the government, guys? Are they the only ones? As Mo's lifestyle, we need to understand that we cover ourselves, our culture, living abroad, diaspora in life. We cover travel. We cover family. We cover community. That's why it's important to us. And also as a Kenyan, it's important because these Somalis, many of them who don't even have an experience living in Kenya, will soon be deported back here to Kenya. And we are going to have to absorb them, whatever that will mean for us. Yeah? Yeah. So what we want to say is that for those people who are supporting this horrible attack on a group of people, a community that's only 2% of the population in Minnesota, I want you to understand that you can express patriotism without having divisive politics. You can express patriotism without racially profiling people, without profiling people in any way. Yeah? You can express patriotism, but without collectively punishing a group of people. Punish individuals. Be fair. Use the American Constitution. Yeah? Remember that there is refugee law. And one day, you who is punishing these people might end up in another country as a refugee. If not you, maybe your child or someone that you know and that you love. So in Mo's lifestyle, what we're going to do here, we're going to always be honest. We're going to say, Apana, this is not acceptable. This is not good. These are my brothers and sisters. Collective punishment on one group means it might be collective punishment on us one day, guys. It's wrong. Completely wrong. We have to call out what is wrong. My host father and my host mom were actually, very liberal in their thinking, much more liberal than I ever was even, but they would never stand for this. They're God rest their souls in peace. They're no longer here on this earth. They rested a few years ago. But I tell you, those people taught me a lot. Living with them taught me a lot about non-discrimination, about acceptance, about love, about living a Christian lifestyle where you express the same kind of justice and equality behavior towards people regardless of the color of their skin or their race. Yeah. So I think that they gave me a very proper and good perspective of what it meant to be a Minnesotan. And these are people of means. These are not people who did not have money. Who knows, maybe they were billionaires, but they kept their, they were quiet about their money. But based on how they lived their life, I knew they were not struggling. Yeah. These are two people, individuals who were both only children with parents who had substantial amounts of money, but they decided to use that money to help people like me and others, because there were also Chinese who lived with them. I lived with them for a very long time, about 3 years, yeah? And they were my friends, and they were also my parents' friends, their family friends. So what I want to say is that this is not the America that I know, and this is not the Minnesota that I know. But I believe that that Minnesota and that America is still there in the undercurrent. There are people who are going to fight back. There are people who are going to raise their voices against injustice. And we as Africans and we as Kenyans should never, never side with the wrong side. We should never, never condone unfair, ill treatment of other people just based on the color of their skin or their race. We should never condone community punishment because it is wrong and it could happen to you, and we know that is ethically and morally wrong. Yeah, and it will be punished. It's wrong. It's completely wrong. So guys, whatever the news is feeding us, always remember where the Somalis came from. The fact that they actually built themselves up with their bootstraps. They're doing it right here in Nairobi. We have seen them doing it right here in Kenya. But they're being profiled. Now it looks like anything that is built by Somalis in Kenya is all suspect. When we know it's not true, we know that there are many Somalis who came here from Somalia and were trekking the roads here carrying cash in baskets because their country had literally gone to ruins. And when they came, we would saw them in the banks going to get loans as groups. They would go in as a bunch of men, maybe 4 or 5 men come together in their kanzus and ask for a loan. Yeah, they put their money together, they save it together, and they take a loan and they put up a building or they put up a petrol station or something like that. These people have actually built themselves up with their bootstraps. So we have a lot to be grateful for because of the Somali community as a group. And I want to say that despite the fact that many Somalis have been misused in the wrong way in terms of, even being, engaging in terror, okay, in Eastern Africa. So, we know that there are some, extremist people, in the world, and they come in all religions, races, colors, and creeds. And these people will engage in terror all over the world. But we cannot blame a whole community of people for the actions of a few. We cannot do that because we know that a lot of these things are sponsored events, and we should not be naive and think or, side with. We should not think or side with the wrong side. We should always side with the truth, we should always side with justice. Truth and justice and fairness. Yeah, that's the whole idea. The law is supposed to help us all have an equal chance under it and protect our rights. Some of the rights are inalienable, such as the right to life. If, for example, some Somalis feel that their lives are at stake by being removed from the country, then you're going to see that there's going to be a lot of serious law cases. Yeah, cases coming up in court to stop these deportations from happening to the whole bunch of Somalis just because of a few. Yeah, so let's be honest, let's be fair. No matter what people may say about Somalis, we know their history. Now I've shared it with you. Now you know, guys. Yeah, this is my position as Mo's Lifestyle, that we always go with the truth and with justice and fairness, and not politicization of information. Whatever information we hear in the media, always weigh it against the truth, against facts, because that will always save you, from being manipulated and lied to. Okay, so love to you guys, and for the Somalis in Minnesota who feel picked on, who feel insecure, who feel scared, I just pray for you that you will find a way out of this, and that this whole thing will stop as soon as possible, because Minnesota and Minnesotans have always been nice. Okay, guys, bye. Take care. Thank you so much for watching, and lovely to share with you again. I guess I'll call this the couch. Yeah, we're going to have couch talk sometimes. Yeah. All right. Bye-bye.